Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. The Governor, Sir David Steele, is coming up to 3 years in the post, and as a former Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy, he's certainly used to choppy waters, and there's been definitely some of that here on the Rock recently with treaty negotiations, the Mcgrail Inquiry, other security issues that have been raised. So what does Sir David make of all of that, and how has he found his time on the Rock? Tonight on Viewpoint, Sir David Steele. Sir David, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. You've been here almost 3 years now. Can I ask you, what are your thoughts about Gibraltar and how have you found your time here?
Ros, I don't know where 3 years has gone to. I think it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, really. When I look back on the 3 years, to come out of COVID in England, out of lockdown in England, into semi-lockdown here in Gibraltar, to get through the COVID crisis, and then you have all the treaty negotiations and Brexit. Then you have the death of Prince Philip, and then the passing of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. You have OS-35, you have the water outage because of the fire in the tunnel. It seems to have been a roller coaster of events, but it's been magnificent for the interaction I've had with so many people in Gibraltar, and that is the privilege of the job, is the interaction with people in Gibraltar. And I was only in Morrison's the other day. I say interaction with the people of Gibraltar because clearly I haven't been making it into some homes, because I was in Morrison's a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday morning buying some goods, and I was there looking at the price of honey, and all of a sudden I had a tug on my jacket, and there was a young lady who was saying, "Governor, Governor." She couldn't say governor, it was Governor. "Governor, Governor, good morning." And I said, "Hello, what's your name?" She said, "My name is Millie. You met me at my school a few weeks ago." And Millie and I had a chat for a few seconds, and I noticed just halfway down the aisle was a lady with the trolley, and she was looking in our direction, and I presumed it was Mum. And then Millie said, "Well, have a good afternoon, Governor." And I went back to looking at the price of honey, and I kept my ear open, and she walked down to obviously to see her mum. And Mum turned to Millie and said, "Millie, who were you talking to?" And she said, "Mum, it was the governor, silly." And I just thought it was just so nice that the younger folk have been able to just come up to me and have a chat.
I mean, you've had such a long and distinguished career in the Navy. You were the Queen's ADC as well. You're a trained barrister at law. How much has all of that helped you prepare for the role that you've taken on? And of course, you've come in here on your own. There's no Mrs. Governor. And so you've had to work twice as hard, in your own words. So just tell us about how your past experiences have really come into good use during your time here.
I hardly think it was a distinguished career, but it was a long career in the Navy. And I think in any military career you get huge variety. And the big thing about a military career is people. You're engaging with people the whole time. The whole point of being an officer in any of the armed forces is that capacity to have empathy for and to lead people. And I think the job of governor is about people. It's a highly diplomatic, politically charged at times job. And if you're able to engage with people, then probably you're able to get the results that you're looking for as well. So yes, the career in the Navy was wonderful. My 5 years in commercial life was brilliant. The legal side has helped because it seems to me that everybody in Gibraltar is a lawyer, so at least I can talk on the same terms. And certainly I think during the difficulties and challenges we've had in negotiating this treaty for a future relationship with the European Union, my international law, I would never say expertise, but slight knowledge has helped me in the negotiation process, and I hope helped me be a good interlocutor between the government of Gibraltar, the United Kingdom government, and being able to help with the negotiations as they continue.
We'll talk about the treaty in a moment, but I want to ask you about so far. I mean, you still have another year to run, but what's been your proudest achievements?
Oh, others will judge whether or not there's been an achievement. My greatest pride and pride is an awful term, but my greatest pleasure is being able to, despite COVID, has been interacting with the population in Gibraltar. And the wonderful thing about being the governor of Gibraltar is that you can be at one moment high ceremonial and the next moment meeting million Waitrose choosing honey and everything in between. And that lifestyle of having this very privileged position and yet being still able to walk down the main street and enjoy the company of everybody makes it a huge privilege to be here.
Well, let's talk about the role of governor. Why does Gibraltar need a governor? I mean, this is an age of instant communication, fluid travel. Why does Gibraltar need a governor on the rock?
I think the essence of being the governor of Gibraltar, I can't speak for the other overseas territories. Two things. First of all, I have said before, of all the overseas territories, there is no governor that is made to feel more welcome or more at home than the governor of Gibraltar. I genuinely think that Gibraltar likes having a governor. And let's forget the name for the moment, but that the person who is representing His Majesty the King, representing the United Kingdom of Great Britain in Gibraltar, and ensuring that that relationship endures and prospers, makes this a very important job. And there has been comment about whether it should be just ceremonial, whether it should be a lieutenant governor. Let's take the name out of it altogether. But the role itself, as defined in the Constitution in 2006, is incredibly busy. Most people, I suspect, only see the governor, as somebody in a uniform or doing ceremony occasions. That probably takes up 5%, probably less of my time. The rest is in intricate arrangements, discussions, negotiations between His Majesty's Government of Gibraltar, His Majesty's Government in the United Kingdom, and more latterly because of the European Union angle as well. So 95% of my time is spent dealing with high-level diplomacy, high-level politics, which underpins the relationship and the excellent relationship that is between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom. So as long as the United Kingdom and Gibraltar have that relationship, then having a presence by somebody whose interest is in service to Gibraltar and maintaining the relationship, that umbilical cord between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom, I think will endure, and I hope it will endure.
But to some, it's a reminder of our colonial past. As the Chief Minister highlighted in my interview with him in Viewpoint a few weeks ago, governor means to govern. And to some people, it just harks back to an era that we have moved away from. So what's your view on how the role of governor should perhaps evolve in the future, or should it not evolve at all? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the 2006 Constitution lays out exactly the role of the governor from 2006 to the current day. At the time in the British Parliament, the Foreign Secretary said it was a mature and modern constitution for the relationship that Gibraltar enjoys with the United Kingdom. And I think, given that it has endured since 2006 to the current day, I think that relationship works. I'm perhaps too arrogant in saying that I think the relationship between the United Kingdom and Gibraltar has never, ever been better. And that, I think, is because the governor, the Chief Minister and the government understand their separate responsibilities. I'm not an elected representative. I'm an appointed representative of His Majesty the King. My job is to make sure that I never cross the boundaries of what has been agreed by the elected representatives in the Parliament in Westminster and the Parliament here in Gibraltar. And that arrangement has been hard won to suit the circumstances as they were in 2006 and as I believe they are still today. The United Kingdom has been good for Gibraltar and Gibraltar has been good for the United Kingdom. To maintain that relationship in that format, I think is the primary responsibility of the governor today. And if he or she can impart a little bit of influence, a little bit of experience in making sure that relationship works like clockwork, then the governor has done his or her duty.
And can that relationship work if, as has been suggested, the role should become more ceremonial, or perhaps it should go to a Gibraltarian? In either of those circumstances, what's your view on whether the functions that you carry out can be done to the level and ability that they are carried out in those two circumstances?
I'm going to be brutally honest with you, Ros. I don't think it is the case. I think having a governor that has some authority, I'm not going to say power, but authority to add to the debate is massively helpful. And over the last 3 years, I have worked closely with the Chief Minister, every minister, and the Leader of the Opposition, and the Leader of TG, Together Gibraltar, to take forward that relationship. And I think the governor needs that independence. A governor like the governor of the Jersey, Guernsey, the Isle of Man, a lieutenant governor, has very little authority and has a ceremonial position. Maybe you should ask other people, but I rather hope that in some small way I have been able to assist through an incredibly difficult period the Chief Minister and his government and Parliament to deliver against a very, very difficult set of circumstances. Take that away and the governor becomes purely ceremonial. I think he or she will not be able to bring the expertise, the experience, maybe, that you so kindly alluded to when you asked me the question of what did you bring to the role. If I had just been asked to be a ceremonial governor, I wouldn't have come to Gibraltar. I came here to be of service. When I stood before the Parliament on the day that I was installed as governor, I said I came to be of service. I'm not sure that I would have accepted just a ceremonial role because it wasn't the service that I was trying to give.
Mm. And how, in your view, does the UK view its relationship with Gibraltar?
The United Kingdom is immensely proud of Gibraltar. There are 14 overseas territories. If you walk down the main street of Warrington or Ipswich and ask anybody about Gibraltar, they know all about Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar, where it is. If you ask about the Falkland Islands, they would say the same. Sadly, if you asked about Anguilla, the Turks and Caicos Islands, the Cayman Islands, St Helena, even the South Sandwich Islands, there would probably be a blank. But the people of the United Kingdom, as you well know, have a passion for the Rock of Gibraltar, which goes back centuries. Our histories are joined together, they're conjoined since 1704. And since 1704, we've faced trauma together. We've faced the First World War, the Second World War, and we've done it together. And I think that relationship today, as I have said before, is stronger than it ever has been, probably because of the circumstances that have arisen since Brexit.
Okay, so David, you've not mentioned the word colony. But yet, in some people's eyes, the fact that the UK retains reserve powers over the overseas territories, and in fact, on occasion, is threatened to use those reserve powers in situations in BVI, Northern Ireland. How can Gibraltar consider itself to be in a non-colonial relationship as long as the UK retains those reserve powers?
Of course, if you were to ask me, Gibraltar is no more a colony in the United Kingdom's eyes than perhaps America is today. Gibraltar is a colony by dint of being in the United Nations eyes a non-self-governing territory. The Constitution of 2006 gave Gibraltar the right to self-determination and self-governance, except in 3 particular areas. And in those 3 particular areas, defence, international relations and security, they are all there as reserve powers in the annex to the Constitution to ensure the United Kingdom's interests in Gibraltar. When you have such intricate defence interests in Gibraltar, when you have the position in the world that the United Kingdom has on the international stage and which promotes Gibraltar and includes Gibraltar, the United Kingdom needs some assurance that the standards by which the United Kingdom wants to operate will be replicated in Gibraltar, which they are. We have the same legal system, we have the same police system, we have the same health system, we have the same zebra crossings and traffic lights. So to maintain that assurance, the United Kingdom has reserved some rights to itself. They're hardly ever exercised. In the time I've been here, I have never exercised any of the powers in the Constitution. Everything has been done by negotiation and discussion with the Chief Minister and his government. So I think what the Foreign Secretary said in 2006 about the Constitution, it was modern and appropriate, devolving as much as possible to the government of Gibraltar for the people of Gibraltar. And I would only say this: the United Kingdom is a country of over 65 million people now, compared to Gibraltar's 40,000 people. I would also say that the United Kingdom has the most intricate world presence, and therefore Gibraltar can call upon that world presence to promote its own interests.
Let's just talk about defence. You mentioned defence there. Obviously, the MOD spending on defence has gone down over the years. I mean, Gibraltar was quite a substantial military base in the past. It's not so much now. However, it still retains a key defence element here on the Rock. How do you see that progressing?
Well, I think it's getting more and more important. I think defence over the last 5 years, the last decade or so, did take a downturn as the strategic interests of the United Kingdom changed. They've come back hard right in the sense of being a world presence. And I think at a time when the world is such an uncertain place, having that ability to have defence assets in Gibraltar, at the entrance to the Mediterranean, at the entrance into the Atlantic, is pretty vital. Last year alone, 77 Royal Navy ships visited Gibraltar. We had 5 US submarines visiting Gibraltar. We had 3,000 or so British and American troops training in Gibraltar. So I think Gibraltar is becoming increasingly a strategic military asset again, as it was back in the Second World War and during the Cold War.
I mean, there has been further investment in the overseas military bases, Cyprus, Gibraltar, both included in that investment. Can you see further investment in the future?
I suspect there will be. We're investing heavily in the naval infrastructure. There's been huge investment in the communications infrastructure over the last 3 years alone. I can see, and the nice thing is that Gibraltar welcomes it. Gibraltar is a very friendly defence, very friendly towards defence, and I think it will be increasing over time, especially in our naval infrastructure.
So we'll talk about the treaty in part 2, but I do want to ask you, Sir David, you spoke about some of the things that we see being only 5% of the things that you do, and we do know that you have been involved to some extent in treaty negotiations, but just give us a flavour of some of the aspects of your role that you have been involved in that we haven't necessarily seen.
Yeah, I think it's mostly, Ros, an advisory role. I'm always being asked my thoughts on how Gibraltar will view a particular provision and what may or may not be the treaty. I'm also representing what His Majesty's government in London thinks about the treaty negotiations. So I'm somewhat a sort of interlocutor between all the parties and making sure that the process continues as efficiently as it can.
And of course, you have weekly or regular briefings with the Chief Minister. How would you characterise your relationship with Fabian Picardo?
My goodness, the Chief Minister has faced a huge amount of work over the last 3 years. It's been a tsunami of difficulties. I have done my very best to support the Chief Minister during very difficult times, and thankfully he's given me the licence to be able to advise and to counsel and sometimes to act as a critical friend. So we have a very close working relationship.
We've seen lots of pictures on social media of yourself and the Chief Minister cycling up the Rock of Gibraltar. But in terms of the separation of powers, which is so important for our democracy, do you feel that perhaps you've overstepped the mark in that display of friendship? Because there does have to be some separation there, and we've seen that in particular with the Mcgrail Inquiry.
I hope not. He's very unfit, so I have to try and keep challenging him going up the rock.
You've made him lose lots of weight.
I've made him lose lots of weight. Ros, the intricacies of the business of the last 3 years have been extraordinary and exceptional. The Chief Minister has had to deal with so much, and I have set myself up to support him in whatever way I possibly can, from my role as governor, but also as David Steele as an individual. And I make no apology for helping the head of the elected government here in Gibraltar in the same way as his ministers and Parliament have helped him. I applaud what Parliament has done over the last 3 years in allowing the Chief Minister and his ministers the space necessary to deal, on one hand, with some incredibly complex negotiations, and on the other hand, dealing with COVID and all the other difficulties we've faced. Parliament has been impressive in the way that it has dealt with the politics of today. And my closeness to the Chief Minister is replicated in my closeness to Marlene Hassan Nahon and also to Keith Azzopardi, who I respect and see quite often. They choose not to cycle up the Rock, Fabian does. And when we cycle up the Rock, which is not very often actually, it may seem quite a lot, it's about once a month, we always stop at the top of the Rock and we have half an hour talking about business. And then I beat him back down to the convent. So actually, it's a good and warm relationship between two professionals trying to do a really good job.
We won't say where you stop and talk, because then you'll find a GBC journalist hiding in a bush. But I want to ask you, do you ever disagree on anything, work-wise? Have you had disagreements?
I can't think we've had major disagreements, because I suspect that's the art of diplomacy. We debate a lot of issues, and we come to consensus, but we've never had a falling out. So let's leave it at that.
No goss there then.
No.
Okay, so David, well, we still have plenty more to talk about in part two. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the treaty. And Mcgrail, you kindly agreed to ask whatever questions I throw at you. So we'll be back in just a few moments.
Delighted.
Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm joined with the Governor, Sir David Steele, and we're having a chat about your 3 years here in Gibraltar. And of course, one of perhaps what's taken up a great deal of your time is the treaty negotiations. I'd like to sort of go into that in quite some detail, if you don't mind, because obviously the public are only given certain amounts of information. I think, you know, the government updates us where they can, but obviously they don't want to give a running commentary, and then we have the media in Spain speculating. I'd like to ask, first of all, what your own personal involvement has been in these negotiations.
Ros, I think I've played a part that perhaps governors haven't done in the past in such international intricacy as this, simply because of the huge complexity of it. I never, when I got the job, I never expected that I'd be thrust into this, but with the complexity has drawn me into it, and I've quite enjoyed being a helping hand in a very difficult circumstance. Got to remember, there are hundreds of players in these negotiations. As I said, maybe on your programme some years ago, these negotiations have been like playing chess in 4 dimensions. The complexity is immense. It isn't just border fluidity. When the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union, it left a huge infrastructure of law and international arrangements. So in our negotiations, we've not just talked about border fluidity, we've talked about the environment, we've talked about goods and customs and level playing field, all those things that were discussed about when the United Kingdom left the European Union. Gibraltar has had to do it itself. And Gibraltar has done that with a very small negotiating team, brilliant negotiating team, alongside quite literally hundreds of officials in the United Kingdom, officials from the Home Office and the Foreign Office, from the Department of Trade, from the Department of Health, supporting the infrastructure of the negotiations. Hugely complex, and somewhere in all that, David Steele has played an interlocutor part, maintaining the relationships between the various parties, making sure things happen at a certain time. And yes, every now and again, one of the team here, which is a very small negotiating team, might have said, David, how does this look to London? Or London may have said to me, David, how does this look to the Chief Minister and his advisors in Gibraltar? And so my part has been very much central. I say in the eye of the storm is always the quiet patch. This storm has no quiet patch. It's a storm everywhere, and I'm right in the centre of it.
Do you think, you know, the fact that Gibraltar was excluded from the UK's main negotiation, its own Brexit deal, I mean, do you think that that was a strategic error on behalf of the United Kingdom? In terms of leaving Gibraltar, I'm not saying it's on its own, because obviously it's got a UK negotiating team working for it, but it has weakened our hand, hasn't it?
It wasn't the United Kingdom's fault, that, and of course actually being able to get a deal, we had to get all the European Union countries on side, and of course Spain wasn't on side with including Gibraltar. So we had to include Gibraltar as a separate arrangement after the United Kingdom withdrew from the European Union. And that has made it very, very difficult. Spain has its own ambitions and priorities, and unfortunately on this case Gibraltar has been left out of the arrangement for the United Kingdom in 2020, but my goodness, I think if everybody could see just how much the United Kingdom is working to get a satisfactory arrangement that maintains the current economic and social model for Gibraltar, I think the people who live in Gibraltar would be incredibly proud that they are being supported in this way.
You spoke about being an interlocutor between the various relationships. What about your relationship with the ambassador in Spain, in Madrid, Hugh Elliott, who's been at the centre of a storm over the past week involving the resignation of Dominic Raab? He said, the former Foreign Secretary said that a senior diplomat breached the mandate agreed by the cabinet. Were you aware of that breach when it happened, which was before the New Year's Eve framework? Were you aware of that breach?
No, there was from our point of view, no breach. There have been discussions throughout. You have to have exploratory discussions about options and possibilities, and that's been throughout the 3 years that I've been here. None of it is, some of it may be formal, some of it is not formal, but I was not aware of any breach as Mr. Raab.
Then why was Simon Manley, the former Spanish ambassador, brought into the negotiations, which is what the Telegraph had reported, that Hugh Elliott had breached some guidelines, which the Chief Minister has also said was not true in an interview he gave with GBC. But in that case, why was Simon Manley brought back?
Oh, very simple, and I'm afraid the reporting has been quite wrong. The head negotiator for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, at about the time we're speaking about, was moved on to another appointment before a new chief negotiator could be promoted into the job or moved into the job. Hugh Elliott moved into the job as an interregnum, and the workload became enormous for him. He's got a huge job as ambassador to the Kingdom of Spain, and Simon Manley was brought in order to relieve Hugh of the extra responsibilities that he had at the time, and then provide that continuation until we now have a lead negotiator who's been negotiating for the last 18 months or so. So Hugh was just taking forward the role that he had before, and he wasn't replaced. It wasn't like that at all.
Okay, there's been talk about Spanish boots on the ground in the media recently with this resignation of Dominic Raab. Let me just ask you a question. Would you consider Spanish boots on the ground on Gibraltar territory either permanent or temporary? Would you consider that to be a breach of Gibraltar's sovereignty, jurisdiction and control?
I'm not going to answer that directly, simply because I'm going to say it like this, Ros. The sovereignty of Gibraltar and the United Kingdom's part with Gibraltar is inviolable. That will never, ever be lessened, reduced or minimalised to any degree whatsoever. The Chief Minister said that repeatedly, and so has the Foreign Secretary, and so have successive Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom. Sovereignty is not an issue here, and will never be touched.
Okay, so if you can clarify one point for me, the Chief Minister has spoken in previous interviews about Gibraltar giving access to the Schengen area. The Spanish press has spoken mostly, and Alvarez, the Spanish Foreign Minister, has also spoken about Gibraltar becoming an extension of Schengen. Can you please just clarify what is the model that's being looked at?
What we're looking for here at these negotiations, remembering what I said before, this negotiation is much wider than just mobility, although it is at the centre of everything that we're trying to arrange for Gibraltar going into the future. Gibraltar's economic and social viability depends on that movement across the border to a very large degree. So what we're trying to negotiate is an arrangement where entry into Gibraltar will give the persons entering Gibraltar also the freedom of movement into the Schengen area. To do that, we have to abide by the European Union Schengen acquis, the Schengen rules. To do that, we negotiated in the New Year's Eve Agreement of 2020-2021 that the European Union would put in place an independent body that would protect the Schengen border as the European Union wanted it protected, or monitored, policed if you want. In order to do that, the European Union has to maintain responsibility for overseeing the Frontex arrangements. And if you step further forward than that, it has to be a member of the European Union, the state next to the state that has asked for this right, that has to monitor the job of
Spain.
Frontex,
Yeah.
which is Spain. So Spain has to have European Union responsibility for monitoring the work of Frontex as it polices the borders into Spain.
So those two entry points are going to be the port and the airport. So how is Spain going to monitor Frontex at those points? Whereabouts are they going to be?
And that is exactly what we're negotiating at the moment, is how Spain actually conducts that supervisory role. And that is one of the issues that the current talks are trying to finesse at the moment, that degree of supervision and oversight that is acceptable to Gibraltar so that no sovereignty issues are crossed, and is acceptable to Spain and the European Union to allow them to conduct the oversight necessary under European Union law.
So, at its most simplest, we are possibly looking at Spanish presence in a supervisory capacity at the port and at the airport. Is that what we're looking at?
And it's to a degree, yes, but it is absolutely the degree and the nature of that presence that we are negotiating at the moment. And our red line is that presence, if it is a physical presence, it might not be a physical presence, that presence doesn't cross our understanding of the line of sovereignty.
And also understanding what the role of supervisor entails and what powers they might have.
Correct, exactly. And that's all the negotiations are addressing at the moment, is the nature of that authority.
We saw Rishi Sunak intervene in the very complex issue of the Northern Irish border. Why has that same impetus not been given to the hugely complex issue of Gibraltar's border? Why has he not intervened and saved the day?
Well, I'm sure the Prime Minister will come riding in on his white horse very shortly.
Oh, really?
I know that the Prime Minister, of course, is only 7 or 8 months in the role. These negotiations have been going on in earnest since 2016. He's had a few other matters to deal with. The Northern Ireland matter was hugely complex, and he's dealt with it. I believe that the way that the officials in the government of Gibraltar, the officials and the elected representatives in the government of Gibraltar, and the elected representatives and the officials in the United Kingdom have got these negotiations to a point now where the Prime Minister can get engaged. And I would not be surprised if we see Mr. Sunak riding in with his sword waving very shortly indeed.
Oh, interesting. Thank you for sharing that. There has been a 13th round of talks. I remember last year, about a year ago, we were within touching distance, and here we are on the 13th round now. Have you been updated on this latest round?
I have. I'm constantly updated.
Have we moved forward?
We're always moving forward. I keep saying these negotiations, and you'll forgive me, I must be getting really boring. I have never, ever known such complexity in negotiations. They are literally turning on words. And day in, day out, the Chief Minister, the Attorney General and the Deputy Chief Minister are turning on those words and trying to get exactly what they need for Gibraltar's interests. And so the negotiations that have been going on recently have been going on about security and defence, level playing field, goods and customs, the border fluidity arrangements. Every word, as we know from the Treaty of Utrecht, is important. And we are making sure that the interests of Gibraltar can be completely defended in every word that we're using.
If I were to put, I was going to say gun to your head, and I don't want to do that, obviously, but when's your best guess that we might get a deal? When do you think it might?
I can't answer that. My hope is that we will have some outcome before we go on some holiday.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And now, talking about complexities, can we move on to the Mcgrail Inquiry? Now, you yourself moved to Gibraltar. You took up your role just a couple of days, I think, after Ian Mcgrail, the former police commissioner, retired from his role. And about 5 weeks later, you sat here with in an interview with my colleague, Jonathan Scott, and he asked you about that retirement, and you said that, you know, these things are a natural progression of life in a public office. And you commended his record. But now we know from documents submitted to this public inquiry that the then governor, Nick Pyle, had lost confidence with him. I mean, so there does seem to be, I mean, the public can be forgiven for thinking that there was a deliberate attempt to gloss over what is a substantive issue of public interest. Why You must have known the reasons for his retirement at that time.
No, I didn't, Ross. Actually, I didn't know. It was dealt with by my predecessor in the job, and when I came into office, I found out about it quite rapidly after I came into office. Um, I'm not going to say anything particular about the inquiry itself. What I would say is that Mr. Mcgrail had spent a long time in the police force and was a very experienced officer. And his retirement from the police force has led to the appointment of Mr. Richard Olger as the Commissioner. And I would say that my confidence in Mr. Olger and the Royal Gibraltar Police is total. I have said it a number of occasions now. I think the Royal Gibraltar Police serves the people of Gibraltar with distinction in very, very difficult circumstances. I can't think of another police force in the United Kingdom with so few people that has to deal with such a plethora of different issues, both at sea, on the land, of course with an international border. It's a really difficult job to do, and Richard Olger and the Royal Gibraltar Police are doing an extraordinary job.
Again, referring to the documents that have been submitted to the inquiry, and I know you don't want to talk about those issues, but let me just ask you that, matters of policing has arisen.
Yeah.
Have you taken it upon yourself to look into those matters personally? Because they are concerning some of the allegations that are being made.
I think it's important to point out that the Governor doesn't have responsibility for the police force. The responsibility for the police force rests with the Gibraltar Police Authority and with the Commissioner of Police himself. The Governor has responsibility for internal security. And in that regard, I have become involved to make sure that we have an organisation and a security apparatus that is fit for the people of Gibraltar. There are elements in the past where there have been shortcomings in the police force. In 2019, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary produced a report that was less than distinguished. In 2022, at the beginning of 2023, they delivered another report, a backup report on that 2019 report, and were hugely complimentary about the police force in Gibraltar. So over the period between 2019 and 2023, Mr. Olger and his senior executive team and every male and female member of the police force have created a force that is much more what we want in Gibraltar today rather than what it might have been in the future, in the past.
Can I just ask you about the Eastern Beach smuggling incident in February? You issued a joint statement with the Chief Minister saying that there had been a grave breach of British sovereignty. Have you reviewed the internal security and defence aspect of that night? Are you satisfied that they did what they needed to do? What was our defence of Gibraltar? In that situation, there was a mob of about 20 on the beach, I think, 20 or 25 on the beach, with only a couple of officers on duty, as I understand it. I mean, are you satisfied that Gibraltar was adequately defended that night?
It's a very incisive question. 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day, Gibraltar is being protected and maintained its security by the Royal Navy, by the police, by the customs, by a range of institutions, as well, of course, as high-level intelligence. On this occasion, we missed it. But for the last 3 years, there has been no incident like this one. In fact, as the Chief Minister said, this is the most serious incident we've had for nearly 10 years. The track record of maintaining the integrity and security of Gibraltar has been extraordinary. On this occasion, we simply didn't know it was going to happen. And unfortunately, and it happened because, unfortunately, the Spanish authorities made a mistake. Now, whether they made a mistake intentionally or unintentionally, I'm not sure we'll ever find out. But what happened on that beach that night was unbelievably awful.
Have lessons been learned?
No, without question. Certainly I think both our police and our customs now have seen that area as an area of vulnerability that we need to watch much more carefully. The Chief Minister has made recent changes to the tobacco zones around that area, so that we're protecting that area a great deal. So not only have lessons been learned, but action has been taken.
And just going back to one final question regarding the Mcgrail Inquiry, things have been halted at the moment, so do you have any update? I mean, you're the person that appointed the Commissioner of the Inquiry. Any update as to when it will get going again? And also, are you concerned how damaging this inquiry is to Gibraltar's reputation? Because, there are, particularly with the arrests now, the public perception out there is what is going on. Your final thoughts on that?
Very, very briefly, Mr. Mcgrail called for this inquiry, and the Chief Minister and the government asked me to call the inquiry, and I did call the inquiry. There can be no greater accolade for a judicial system than being as open and transparent as possible. And that is exactly what we're trying to achieve in this matter. The Chief Minister said in Parliament that in opening this inquiry, all avenues for investigation would be opened. And that is what is happening at the moment. It is uncomfortable. Any inquiry is going to be uncomfortable. But I think it says a lot about the judicial system in Gibraltar that we are having a public inquiry and that it is not being kept under wraps. How the inquiry moves forward, given the other matters that have arisen as a result of the inquiry and falling from the inquiry and other investigations, is a matter for Sir Peter Openshaw. The moment he is suspended moving forward on it, until he has had a chance to consider all the evidence and all the other allegations that are being made at the moment. But I'm sure Sir Peter will make an announcement in due course as to how he sees the inquiry moving forward.
Okay, so David, let me just ask you, finally, you've been in Gibraltar 3 years, and I'd just like to ask you, in your final year, what would you like to see in the months ahead? And how would you yourself like to be remembered?
Oh, goodness. Thank you, Ros. The first thing is I desperately want to see a treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union for Gibraltar that gives Gibraltar the ability to have its economic and social model continued in the future. I would like to see it for Gibraltar, and I'd like to see it for the Campo region as well. It pains me that 45% of the people in the Campo region are unemployed. When we have this hugely wonderful potential economic model in Gibraltar that can spread that wealth and economic credibility to the rest of the Campo region. I think it will also hugely improve the bilateral relations between the United Kingdom and Spain if, after 320 odd years, we could find an arrangement that suits both of us, the European Union, and of course the United Kingdom and Gibraltar. So that after that, I could probably just enjoy my time here a little bit more than perhaps has been available to me in the last 3 years. As to your final question, how I'd like to be remembered, I've got a year to go, so I could have very many poo traps before I leave. But if somebody said to me he was a governor that really cared, then that would be a fantastic epitaph.
I think people will be very sad to see you go.
Well, they're not sure. I've got a year to go yet, Ros.
Well, we look forward to seeing you at Castle and Bainey Bathers again
I'll
on
be there.
National Day, and all those other landmarks.
Trim and live.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for allowing me into your boudoir to ask you these questions. I really much appreciated. And thank you for joining me on Viewpoint. I'll be back next week at the same time.